Hello and welcome to part 1 of 3, actually, of the Convoy War and the Perfect Storm. This was originally going to be a 2-part introduction, it's now a 3-part introduction, and yes, it is being recorded the day of the live, which is unusual for me, I know, but again, yesterday turned into a day of police visits and all sorts of things, sorting stuff out, and lots of electricians. So it's been fun. Now, I have been joined by the fluffy research assistant who's technically asleep at the moment beside me, but we'll see how long he stays that way. He's currently wagging his tail and demanding lots of fuss and attention. So that's a heads up in case a dog appears in the conversation. So, part 1, the Battle Atlantic, because I thought before I got into PQ17, I have to give an overview of what's going on in the rest of the war in terms of the Battle Atlantic, which is this big thing. Anyway, I always rather like that picture. It's the Bedford Basin Place of History site, and it's where one of the key convoy gathering points for the Battle Atlantic in both World Wars. So it's a really, really historic place as far as the convoys go, and it's really nice to have a big plaque there. Anyway, so here are some stats. Roughly 36,200 sailors killed. There are all sorts of odds between them, between the Allies, and 36,000 merchant seamen killed. So you've got 72,000, but there are estimates which go up to 80,000 and as low as 60,000. So I've gone with those figures partially because they're the figures in 2 of the biggest books, and they're also the figures on Wikipedia, and they're roughly in the middle of the estimates, so it works quite well. 175 warships. That includes trawlers, corvettes, and bigger ships, including a few, and 741 RAF Coastal Command aircraft lost in anti-submarine sorties. Now, some of these aircraft were lost to submarines, some of them were lost to air attacks, some of them were lost because of engine issues. There are lots of mechanical issues, and it's a long-range operation, so plus quite a large number are also included in that figure. It seem to be the ones lost at various airfields, which were not really great places to be landing. Nazi Germany lost about 30,000 U-boat sailors killed. Again, there are disputes over these numbers. 783 submarines lost. And 47 other warships lost, including, most famously, the Admiral Graf Spee, the Bismarck. Lots of very large surface raiders lost, but also lots of smaller surface raiders. And the Kingdom of Italy lost about 17 submarines. I do love it that the Regia Marina, and even though it's fascist Italy, it's not fascist Italy, or sort of as in like it's Nazi Germany. It is the Kingdom of Italy, because that's what they were at the time. The Battle Atlantic is massive. Prior to America entry into the war, it was estimated the Germans, to try and beat the British, would have to sink 300,000 tons of shipping a month. They occasionally got to this figure, but it was very rare. When America entered the war, they revised that figure up to 700,000 tons. I think about 1 month they managed to get that. The problem is the Victory, the Liberty, all those class of ships were being produced at a very incredible rate, and there is often discussions as to whether or not they were ever close to defeating the British this way. My view is this: the British introduced quite a heavy amount of rationing, which reduced need. They tried to do as much self-sufficiency as they could, and the thing is, unrestricted submarine warfare is dependent upon mass. Okay? You cannot target ships' loads. In fact, they do their best thing to spread out the critical load over as many ships as possible, so that you cannot take out anything which is supercritical. Yes, you might be trying to target tankers, and that's always a problem, but there are lots of other supplies which you are actually far smaller and far more critical than even oil and petrol and aviation fuel. And this is the thing. With submarine warfare, you can't be sure you're going to target those. And actually, the British do prove fairly good and fairly resilient at getting those things through, as opposed to what the Germans were. Okay? The Germans were less capable of getting these things through. In fact, the British imposed a total blockade. So, to really defeat the British, you would need to impose a total blockade. Possibly not for that long. 2 or 3 weeks would probably have done it. But they never managed to do it, and they managed to keep the supplies going. And the greatest achievement of all this is probably Operation Torch, where a huge convoy is shipped across the Atlantic, joins up with another huge convoy from the UK, and takes part in a massive assault on North Africa. And the Axis forces do not know its existence at all. So, here are some realities of anti-submarine warfare and submarine warfare. And if you notice, some of these slides are similar to previous ones. That is because I have done similar topics in the past, but I'm doing them from a different angle. So, you know, I'm making use of the same slides because these things still count. There's still no better displays than these, which I found on WK Loot. Well, on Wikipedia, but from WK Loot. So, you see the tons sunk by U-boats. You can see how often it gets above that 300,000 figure. And you can see how often it gets above that 700,000 figure. There is actually twice. I am sorry. Post-American entry. And really, that's in part because there's far more convoys flowing around the world, and they're able to go even freer on the American seaboard. And that gets them up there. But also how quickly that drops off in 1943. After you've got centimetric radar and all these things coming in. U-boat sinkings especially get very, very high in a month, and that towards the end of the war. And this is a thing of the capabilities and the anti-submarine capabilities of the force goes up, but also the Axis tactics have to change, and do change. You see, Axis tactics at the beginning of the war are far more balanced. They're a far bigger threat and far more. You can afford to be less focused to deal with them because they have surface raiders, they have submarines doing wolf-pack, but they also have lone assassins. Okay, we focus a lot on the wolf-packs, but there were some commanders who would like to avoid the single attacks, the group attacks, and would actually position themselves to do lone attacks, to do things like sneaking into various Royal Navy bases. For example, the attack in the Scarborough Flow. So, you do have lone assassins going out there and also trying to drop off mines and these sort of things. Surface raiders. Now, the fact is, it's not just the actual operation they do which matters. Okay. Whilst they are a threat, whilst they are a persistent threat, you have to adjust your convoy tactics. If you can focus your convoy around defense against just one or maybe just two of the three threats, it makes life a lot easier for the escorts. You can adapt your formation that much easier. If you are facing a full spectrum threat, surface ships, submarines, and aircraft, this makes it far more complicated than if you're facing even just two, let alone just one of those threats. And arguably, one of the reason why the anti-submarine warfare kills go that much high and get that successful towards the end of World War II is because the Germans have been forced down to pretty much just one threat axis. The axis was forced down to just the submarines. And that makes things a lot easier. So, aircraft are your reconnaissance outfits. They're dropping mines and occasionally attacking. The threat of them attacking is far greater than the reality of their attacking. Most of their attacks take place quite close to the UK when the convoys are in the inland homeward stretch. Which is, again, why you need so many smaller ships. We'll get into that in a bit. So, anti-submarine warfare as it begins pre-World War One is pre-World War Two. Actually, let's go back to pre-World War One. Actually, because I did want to add that slide and I took it out, but I'll add in some points. Pre-World War One, anti-submarine warfare is ramming. Literally, that's the idea, because submarines go so shallowly that the idea is you can just run into them if you're a big ship. So HMS Dreadnought does that quite well. They are looking at various means, but they haven't really been developed. And it starts off with the idea of dropping grenades, and then that develops into depth charges for anti-submarine warfare. Now, the thing is, it's focusing at depth charges. It's knowing what level to depth to set them at, and how to get your target, what pattern to use. These are complicated assessments because basically what you're doing with a depth charge is lobbing a load of explosives into the water and hoping you come close to something critical. So anything you can do to give yourself better odds is worth it. Hence the development of Aztec. Doesn't come along early enough in World War One, but does go into production in 1922. So by 1939, the Royal Navy have had it for 17 years. They have been refining it for 17 years. They have missed a couple of issues with it. One, it's not that great if the opponents are on the surface. Two, and this is more of an issue, you have to lose contact in order to run a depth charge attack. Now, these things hadn't been as noticed during exercises. Why? Because on the exercise there is a conundrum. A very simple thing. Exercises are a limited amount of time and you're going for the biggest kill possible to look cool to your mates. So you probably skip past the destroyer and don't reveal your position in order to take out the battleship or the aircraft carrier or the cruiser. In wartime, though, taking out the destroyer is useful. Because if you take out that destroyer, that's a less escort for the convoy as a whole. And if you're in a pack, that means one less escort hunting your rest of your mates, even if you are forced out by the other ones coming after you to push you off. It probably distracts the other escorts. And most importantly, one less escort overall. Escorts are hard to regenerate. That means there's a destroyer lost. That's crew lost. There's a wartime difference to an exercise scenario. They develop hunter groups, and actually we'll get more into hunter groups as things go on, because hunter groups are actually a really relatively intelligent idea. The trouble is using a fleet carrier for them, because a fleet carrier is a very high value asset, and by its nature, a hunter group is going to be rather exposed. Using a fleet carrier for them, not intelligent. HMS Argus, Eagle, or Hermes, that would have been sensible. Small, lighter carriers. Escort carriers, perfect. You know, basically, using fleet carriers, that's water. Using the light carriers, that's iron brew. using escort carriers. That is Iron Brew 1901. That's the point. You can understand them using water, using fleet carriers because they had nothing else available, and it does the job, but it's not really worth it in the same way. Anyway, let's get into the Allied tactics. So, slowly, what they do is they close the air gap. And why is closing the air gap important? Why is there an air gap in the first place? Well, because there's aircraft operating from certain air bases, and even if with refueling and all these things, aircraft do not have unlimited range. And once they've used up their weapons, they have to go back and rearm anyway. So, using Iceland, Reykjavik, and using various bases in Northern Ireland and England and Scotland and Wales, i.e. the United Kingdom, they managed to get quite significant air cover. But it's only, and Canada as well, there is still a gap in Greenland. Even when the Americans joined the war, and the Americans have occupied Greenland. It's fun. So, how do you close the air gap? Well, escort carriers and moving very quickly. Now, there is the direct or Great Circle route, which is one of the convoy routes. But there are also various northern routes which take you further north. Why is it worthwhile going further north? Because that is a harder journey for the submarines. And also, because rough weather also impacts submarines. Yes, they might be below the water, but if there is a lot of rough weather up top, then their aircraft aren't going to be able to find you as easily, if at all. And more importantly than that, the submarines aren't really able to function on the surface that well, so they can't use their guns, so they're limited to torpedoes, and you can't really get a good, accurate periscope target fix when you've got waves keep rushing straight over you. So, that all works. Also, you notice there's a convoy layout here, PQ18. The convoy after PQ17. And this is a fairly typical cruising convoy formation. Lots of destroyers, lots of corvettes, lots of trawlers. Lots of units there around the convoy with the convoy in the middle to try and protect it all. And, it works. But that is very much a full spectrum system. And it's expensive in terms of escorts to build it. So not every convoy has that, especially at the beginning of the World War II. It takes time to build up those numbers. It takes time to build up the escorts. So this is the impact. You're trying to move your convoy in a cordon of protective fire, of screening, of protective ASDEC. What's also not mentioned here is further away, there will be a cruiser force, possibly a battleship force, because they've got to be there in case the surface radar comes out. And there are gaps where they're just not close enough. And therefore, the idea of a surface raider getting amongst that group becomes quite scary. Because what is there in that group that has a chance against a surface raider? The destroyers, you might point out. Yes, destroyers might have a chance if they form up as a body and attack as a group. It could be what happened with the two destroyers escorting an aircraft carrier earlier in World War II day. Or Norway campaign. That could be it. So they have to be fairly short. There are many instances where destroyers do drive off surface raiders. There is a Victoria Cross awarded in one occasion. to an officer who's a former tribal class captain, actually of HMS Cossack, and he's gone on to become a flotilla leader of another flotilla, and he drives the Germans off. And that's almost a year today before the Battle of North Cape. And they are prepared to do that. But that's very high risk. You could lose a lot of destroyers. And they might still get through to the convoy. So surface raiders have a big impact on convoy deployments and convoy organization. Not just submarines. So you've got to not view the Battle Atlantic as a submarine war, or an air war, or a surface raider war. It's all three. So, where else to find me? I'm trying to make each of these three about 25 minutes. Which is why there are three. So, Twitter at AC_Naval History, Patreon, AC Naval History, and Global Maritime History. Hope you enjoyed it and hope this made you think. There's going to be a big, long live this evening, which I will go into probably far more detail, but I wanted to do some introductions as I normally do. And sorry they've been delayed. And up next will be Convoy War and the Perfect Storm PQ17, 2 of 3 Ships of the Convoy War. Enjoy, and see you in a bit.